Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this Zoominar of Repair, Refurbish, Repurpose and Diversify, the future of London development. Before I hand over to Paul, who's going to run through the format of the evening, this event is being recorded. It will be uploaded onto YouTube and social media. So if you wish to remain unknown and anonymous, change your name and just switch off your video. Any questions, as normal, just put them in the chat and we'll come to you guys at the end. And if when the talk gets underway, if you could mute yourselves, it'd be much appreciated. So I'll hand you over now to a familiar face to us all, Paul, if you want to.
Will do. Yeah, thank you, Craig. Evening, everyone. My name is Paul Singh, and I'm a liveryman and junior court assistant of the worshipful company Constructors. I welcome you to our series of Zoominars, where we draw upon the plethora of construction knowledge from within the company, give you some insights into relevant and important topics. Just check out our YouTube page for previous Zoominars, which I'm sure you'll find super interesting. My personal favorite so far is one from our very own Sir Vivian Ramsey about construction contracts. I don't think there was a better person to talk about contracts than the judge. Anyway, today I'm delighted to introduce a very hot topic for the City of London, which is the future of London development. Our speakers on this are two of London's finest, Tez Adamu, who himself is a freeman of the company, and Elad Levin. I'll now hand over to them so they can get the show on the road. Enjoy, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul. I trust you can all see the screen properly, otherwise people would have made some noise about that so far. Thank you very much to the worshipful company of Constructors for giving us the opportunity to present to its members and to the wider audience about what sort of our views are on the Refurbish, Repurpose and Diversify, and what we actually see as the future of London developments. Before we sort of move into the deeper end, just a sort of high-end, high-level review, we will review the current condition of the leasable space and some geospatial drivers. We will go through what automation, flexibility, adaptability, and life sciences mean from the perspective of London. Look at a bit on the holistic and diverse approach to planning, and offer our perspective into how all of that, all of those key drivers will affect the future of construction and property in London. The right-hand side says a bit about the agenda, so we'll talk just a tiny bit about ourselves, go through the evolution of London over the past few years, what we consider to be responsible developments, exploring that shift in development with particular focus on life sciences, and then reach up some conclusions. So both Elad and myself are directors of a company called Eden, where we do a bit of project management, design management, pre-strategy leads, and some project development of ourselves as well. And we focus, we don't have a particular market focus, but we are heavily interested in sciences and how sciences and technology work in London. I'm myself a project manager, and I have some experience in urban development and quite a substantial experience in GMP, good manufacturing practice, that is GMP science. I'm quite passionate for anything that has to do with sustainability and construction technology and implementing that to enable the future of construction. I quite enjoy hiking and I quite enjoy baseball. I'm not very good at either of those, but I still enjoy them. Elad, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Elad Levin. I'm another partner in Eden, and I come from both the commercial side of the businesses and the city, a lot of refurbs and fit outs there. And I met Tez when I was working on the science projects, which are my passion projects. When I'm not working, I like to cooking with friends, cooking for friends when they're allowed to come in. I'm a little bit tired of just cooking for my family in the last year. Anyway, we can move on.
Thanks a lot. So I'll take the lead on going through a bit of London's evolution. And realistically, this is about how has London changed in recent times and what the prospects are on how it will continue. London a few years ago, the year is 1967, and things are not looking very similar to what they are today. Top of the charts are the Beatles. Bankers are roaming around in London with bowler hats. Somebody is dismantling London Bridge and moving that to the United States. Some of you might not have known this, and it was a surprise to me as well. The first City of London office tower was St. Helens. City of London employment sectors were banking in the center, basically, insurance sector about 5 minutes from Lloyd's, legal sector about east of Moorgate, and journalism round about Fleet Street. But over the past few years, this has changed. And pre-lockdown of about a year ago in 2020, we have seen some differences. So Luis Capaldi in 2020, mobile bankers wearing no ties. There are some concerns about over the bridges when what's going on. Gracechurch Street is a latest tower, and we're decentralizing employment sectors across the City of London. And just from these two, you can see how much London has changed, not just in terms of its demographics, but in terms of its character and its development. And it's exactly what we would be expecting from a city as diverse, as cosmopolitan, and as metropolitan as London is. It's a live city, and it is leading the times. And in such a living city, there is that continuous shift. What we are experiencing is that those existing centers, those centers that are already established, are still going through that change. The cultural centers, such as Soho and Covent Garden and Camden City, are shifting and expanding. The commercial centers are competing with one another and expanding still, such as the City of London, West End. We've seen Canary Wharf and in the Isle of Dogs, Old Street, Stratford, King's Cross. But what that brings is new sectors as well at the same time. So new sectors are coming as a result of new technology, and those new sectors require new spaces to be to accommodate them. Those sectors that are introduced into the mix are the recent ones are TMT, technology, media, and telecoms, science and technology, which we're going to discuss a bit today, fintech, private health. I'm sure we can name quite a few of those. But with these new sectors that are introduced and these new spaces requirements that are established, the city establishes itself some new focal points. The creation of these new spaces kickstart the process of establishing new centers, Stratford, King's Cross, London Bridge, and these new centers create new focal points with a new infrastructure around them that will cater to these new sectors that are created. The question therefore becomes, can those traditional centers, such as the City of London being one of them, evolve quickly enough and adequately enough to incorporate these new focal points that we're seeing? And the answer is not straightforward. It's not a straightforward yes or no, and it will depend a lot on the policy, on planning, on statutory requirements, and government plans moving forward. Moving on to the next parts, having seen what London, what the sort of key drivers around London are at the moment at a high level, we will take a bit of a deeper step into seeing how London has changed in these recent times, and getting a bit of a better understanding on how we can assess whether it will continue to do so in the future. London is evolving. There's no doubt about that. We have seen it. We are seeing it every day. I'm certain that a lot of you will have experienced the changes brought in your local area, whether that's where you live or whether that's your work. Those changes in the local area in recent times. But when we are talking about developments in from a planning perspective, and by planning I don't mean town planning necessarily, I mean forward thinking. When we're talking about development, we need to understand what a sustainable approach to that is. And to us, it's a few things. First of all, it's about maintaining London's unique urban fabric. And we mean all of those words there. We need to maintain it. We need to maintain its uniqueness. And it's that urban fabric that is not necessarily a copy of rural areas, but it's actually quite unique and metropolitan. Adding that to essentially what it is, a sustainable growth. And by sustainability, we can define sustainability in a lot of different ways, but as a general heading, it's about adding that sustainability element to London. And that together will give us what we conceive as responsible development. In essence, it's about reusing or repurposing potentially the existing stock, starting new construction with some forward-thinking planning, as we said. Defining sustainability as more than just environmental concerns. It's not just net zero carbon. It's a lot more than that. Even from an environmental perspective, the aspects of circular economy are coming into play. The aspects of reviewing the NOx levels and the emissions of materials are coming into play. And we need to consider social parameters. How does development affect us socially, and what are the financial drivers as well? But in essence, it's what drives that equal sign, because there are some catalysts and some inhibitors to this equation. You cannot just put you cannot just put a plan of maintaining London's urban fabric and a plan for sustainable growth if you don't have adequate planning laws, if your infrastructure investment is not there, if your insurers in general do not have the correct risk appetites to be able to insure the projects, ensure the designers, and by extension the funders as well. So taking the first element of the equation, of that maintaining of London's urban fabric, there are some key drivers here. First one is about understanding what the dominant employment clusters are in London. And those are driven by sort of the historical elements, the geospatial elements of the location, the flow of the river, the prevailing winds, and even the market forces. So, for example, insurance cluster is surrounding the Lloyd's building. New centers that are being put together will need to establish those new ecosystems to enable them to drive. So, infrastructure will need to be put in place to allow those employment clusters to thrive. Transportation links, as we said, coffee shops are important to make those centers vibrant. The picture there shows the overarching sort of a bit in granular detail, actually, clusters of employment in London, and you can see financial and insurance are basically around the city of London, whereas distribution, hotels, and restaurants are where they are spread throughout, but quite predominantly in the center as well. Professional, science, and technology are pretty much just in the center of London. And moving forward from that, a sort of helicopter view of understanding the major districts of London. First of all, what's the major business districts? So East London, City of London being one of them, sort of the Midtown, North London going all the way to Camden, the West End, which is between sort of the Midtown and Westminster. Westminster not as a city, but as a business district between West End and West London, and that area of sort of Hammersmith, Kensington being West London, and South London taking anything that is essentially south of the river into South Bank. Now, these key business districts are hubs for developing new zones, and they have been for quite some time. The question moving forward is, where will those new zones be? What will each one of these business districts attract? Which sectors will they likely be affiliated with, and how can we, what are the requirements from a construction perspective that we need to take into consideration if we want to enable a particular sector, say science, to evolve into City of London, for example. The other part of the equation about sustainable growth is not really that. Sorry, this is just an example of the sustainable growth element of the equation, where in the historical migrations of recent times show some key migrations to or away from the central London business district. For example, insurance, from what you can see on the left-hand side, over the past few years, over the past 10 years, has had a net inwards move towards the City of London, meaning that more insurers have come in than left the City of London. Whereas the TMT sector, for example, has had a wider spread throughout London. So the question about sustainable growth is a bit more unique than that, than just the sort of economical or green credentials. What we're seeing here is that it really does depend on the sector that we are looking at to ensure that the migrations that are taking place or that we're planning to take place are actually taking place with the future in mind. I have no idea what this slide actually entails, but oh, there we go. Sorry. So coming to that equal sign and those key drivers, the inhibitors or the enablers, essentially, of these changes. The current trend over the past few years is that the retail models are collapsing. Yeah, I understand, apart from supermarkets especially over the past 12-month period, but we could see that it was even from April 2020 onwards, the availability of stock up until February last year was far exceeding the stock that was taken up by companies. And that trapezium over there shows the amount of empty retail spaces that are available throughout the central London area. At the same time, and that's where the arrow comes into play. At the same time, there is a noticeable decline in office requirement. And that is not, however, just a COVID and Brexit effects. Since 2017, so over the past 3 or 4 years, we have been seeing a steady decline of the requirements for office space. So coming from CBRE research back in the fourth quarter of last year, that downward trajectory was very prominent from about 2017 onwards. And the evolving technology that we have seen and have been accelerated even further as a result of COVID over the past year will definitely accelerate in our view those central London transactional volumes of offices. So with regards to understanding the other part of the enablers, it's about realizing who are the new players in this game. Who are the new players that require spaces in London? Who are the new players that need offices and more specialized spaces that can either be accommodating the existing stock or can be constructed afresh. So we have had a rise of that technology, media, and telecom industry, that TMT industry, and its sister, the technology and media research and development industry. Those two industries are new players coming into London, where the requirement for specialized equipment is very prominent, and it's not something that you can necessarily work from home when you need to buy a £500,000 piece of kit. At the same time, the financial services is, as a model, is evolving quite a lot. The fintech has been introduced and is driving a new business model in the whole industry. There's a new approach to the sharing economy here. There's a digital finance. Crypto is coming into play with more and more players such as Tesla coming and accepting crypto as a currency, and thereby I wouldn't go as far as say collapsing the established model, but of finance, but definitely challenging it. All of these elements require a level of infrastructure for financial services that is pretty much unprecedented, where cloud is becoming the main model. The cybersecurity servers, firewalls are becoming more and more prominent. And as a result, restructuring the whole industry is becoming more and more a necessity in order for them to survive. New other industries such as healthcare and life sciences are making a huge comeback, with especially over the past year, with for obvious reasons with COVID. But these were industries that were already being established as industries over the past few years and have now been accelerated even further. Another catalyst is changes in office trends, and this is a very hot topic over the past few months and few years, with nobody really knowing what's gonna happen. But our view goes something like this: COVID and Brexit have definitely accelerated the office trends. And how have they accelerated them? Working from home is now the norm, and it will most likely continue to be a large part of working. And people have realized that they can do a lot more, and that they can probably do their work equally well, if not better, by working from home. However, the physical interaction, the human interaction, is still paramount. It's still there. It still needs to happen. It is necessitated for creativity. It is a requirement to enable collective thinking and enable that collaboration between people. So what does that mean? It means that office space will start getting geared more and more towards enabling creativity and having a sort of touchdown space where you can go into the office, touch down with your laptop, connect to a desk, do the work that you would not have otherwise been able to do at home, but you would only do that trip if the trip was worth it. So only if the work was not, if you weren't able to do the work from home, or where if you have meetings, creative spaces that you need to use throughout the day. So we expect to see some reconfiguring of the client-facing spaces and the spaces that are geared towards employees as well. We're looking potentially at companies starting to form more and more hubs of their offices, some satellite offices, whether those are regional in their nature, or whether they cater for small teams or meetings or specialized kind of training, instead of having a huge office space on a floor plate that they can use. At the same time, we are expecting companies to view people, the most important assets, as most of them claim, to view people as an asset that will undergo digitalization in some respect, as in they will need to find out ways to enable people to work from home as much as possible. So what does that mean? So what are the implications of this this whole approach of A, maintaining London's urban fabric, B, having a sustainable growth, and the catalysts and inhibitors that we might be looking at? Well, we're expecting that Class A spaces, so those really high quality spaces, we don't expect much change in terms of their demands. Where we expect changes to be is in Class B and Class C spaces. Those of sort of decent or semi-decent quality or the poor quality spaces that companies will make an exit from. And in terms of retail, we'll expect that there will be some declassification of retail space to enable that space to be multi-used, and the expansion of some secondary retail areas. The location of these areas we will probably start seeing that being outside just zone 1 of London. And as a result, there will be an increase in opportunities in other satellite town centers, which will in turn create new hubs, as we discussed in the previous slide. And that creates a world of opportunities for property development. It allows us to be adaptable, where with building adaptabilities or changing the function of the building or changing the way that the floor plate operates will be a key requirement in projects moving forward. And how we can enable those structures to be repurposed in the future will be a requirement from those clients. And the lease structures will also start becoming a bit more flexible. So I hope that was a useful insight into that part of the equation of how the different parts of London's urban fabric, sustainable growth, responsible development fall in together, and what our view is of the future. So I'll hand over to Elad to go into the shifting developments.
Right. So I'm going to be talking through about London through the prism of science and tech, but I want everybody to take their favorite discipline and just think how that is implied to that favorite discipline. It could be finance, it could be commercial, it could be anything you want. And to start with that, we're going to talk about some of the disruptors that we're seeing in the market that are helping us shift everything around. So the first is demographic shifts, age, technology advances, and especially globalization. As we've seen in the last year, how research is moving across continents and how people are willing to share more and more. It's opening up. It's been more visible maybe to the public to see how research is being shared around between smaller companies and where the pharma is coming into that. And what does that bring us? It brings us new business models. There's a whole shift to outcomes over volume, and we can do a lot more with a lot less these days. Distribution is different. Data at the palm of everybody's hands means that you get demand from people. And basically, this is what these disruptors are driving us forward. So exploring these life sciences. First of all, let's stop calling it life science sector. When we talk about life science, we're talking about science and tech. It could be engineering, it could be data scientists, it could be lasers, it could be medtech, it could be almost anything. So, and we see all of that in London, and it depends where you are and around which university you are to see where these things are developing. And we want to develop, and we're going to talk more about what most of us can see as development. So on the one hand, you have the highly specialized regulated facilities, GMP, containment level 3 and upwards, high-end imaging. It could be anything else along those lines. Those will require specialist developers. It will still stay with the institutions. A lot more, it will have to come from the stronger, the more experienced companies. But most of the market, probably 80% of the market, it has a standard to low service requirement. It's open lab, it's category level 2 labs. It's things that can be done in office space. What spaces are we really looking for, or do we need? It could be almost any space to start with. We can start refurbishing most buildings. There's a misconception that science spaces are complicated. Most of them are not that complicated. Most buildings can be adjusted, and they can we divide them to high, medium, and low tech typologies, where we talked about the highly specialized, highly regulated. Anything from medium to low tech can be done by pretty much a competent developer. Non-specialist developers will concentrate on that. So just as an example, what a specialist item is, this is a GMP facility that's built on top of a hospital. You can see the amount of services that are required for this. It's a containment issue. This will require specialist places to be in. It might even be driven outside of zone 2 due to the problems with dilution into the air and air quality requirements in London. So we need to think about these, and this will still be affiliated with hospitals or universities. Smaller suites will happen in hospitals and are happening in hospitals for the first stages of clinical trials. The normal side of things, the normal labs, and some of the images you see here don't look normal, but they are. Well, we need to supply them shell and core some of the time, or fully equipped labs, depending on who the tenant that we're courting is. We got to remember, when a company that's a science company is taking a lab space, they're actually less than 50% lab space. The most is office space. And sci-tech companies are looking for good office space, pretty much on par with the tech sectors, your Googles or any other example company. So this is the life cycle of a science technology firm, but this is applicable to other sectors. And what's interesting in that is the mid section, the cutoff, the geographic transition tipping point. So if you think about it, you start at the university, you're fighting for a bench. You're a startup, you might be going into an incubator, you want to stay close to where you started, you're still fighting for a bench. Once you start scaling up, you need some more expansion space. Basically, you're quite young, you just need growth space. But now you're starting to shift your geography. You don't really need the mothership that close, though, but it's still nice to be around. Once you start growing up, you become a company, an early stage company. Your talent becomes slightly older too. And we're looking for additional talent, which we're taking from the university, but we're looking for more amenities around us too. And once you evolve to a mature company, you can also build your own facilities, but you got the full cycle of people working for you. So you're looking also for schools, housing, wellness, everything. So like every other company. So what does that give us? This is another representation of what we're looking for. If the core of these circles is the researchers, the people that are concentrating on the research proper, the second circle are the immediate things that they need, their data, their coffee shops, anything that sustains them, the excitement of bumping into other scientists around them or other people from other disciplines. And the third circle is everything that city's giving them, the parks, the transportation, everything that we need in order to have a full ecosystem. That's one thing. The other loop that we're seeing is the knowledge transfer. So once they left their university and They start looking at the knowledge exchange, talent recruitment, although it's still recruiting probably friends. The next step is the commercialization of this thing. And once they become a commercial entity, now they want to stay competitive. So they need that talent that they took from the first place, but the next generation of young, bright things to go in. And so this is just an example of how we start looking at where everything is merging together. So not everything, there's no one perfect place, but you can see the drivers like proximity, especially university hospitals, the number of spin-outs and incubators near us. In terms of mobility, it's transport and broadband data is key. And depending on how big you are, if you're worried about the airports too, when they open properly. And then the market itself, do I have accessibility? Do I have office space that I can cover? Do I have growth space? Where's the residential market? And it goes back to talent. The two examples that we've got here are two things that we overlaid. One is the number of spin-outs compared to access to public transport. The other is spin-outs, location of average office availability, and trade station. That tells us where the demand is. Well, that's one part of showing us the geospatial elements affecting the space where we are. That's just one level of looking at this. I spoke before about one of the options is, especially for young companies, to want to have a fully equipped lab, not just this, because the guys are 2 or 3 guys when they start. All they know is about research. They don't really want to handle any refurb issues. They want to walk in somewhere that can help them, so an incubator, as serviced as possible. We've taken an example from one of the most successful incubators. It's called Lab Central, which is in Boston. But what I want you to take from that is, first of all, the starting point here is that every person pays about $5,000 a month in order for the ability to work in that sort of service space. Why is it important? Because we are seeing this, or we want to see these things coming back around our universities to this level of, this one is supported with by MIT. We think Cambridge, Oxford, King's, Imperial, all can use, with the amount of spin-outs that are coming out, these type of spaces around them. Going to the other side of the spectrum, the refurb, and going back to Tez's responsible sort of, and actually the name of this thing about refurb and repurposing, and saying this is not complicated space. I've put to the side some floor plates. These are just indicative, but they're trying to show how we would generally look at fitting out lab space within different types of floor plates. And you can see that pretty much every floor plate can be adapted. You'd have to consider what the tech that is required on the floor plates is. We used to say that we need 4.2 meters slab to slab in the section. We probably can do with less. Anything that's less than 4 meters become a trade-off, but we can handle that. Most superstructures can take most lab types, especially the medium to low tech, and we can adjust for that in the furniture or in the lab furniture. Infrastructure is still the key. And the other considerations are logistics, which we will need more of, riser spaces, vertical lifting, and vibration categories. Although when we look at this, have a look at the basement. If the vibration is that much of a trouble, make sure you're not over a tube line. You can see sort of my SimCity sort of model and everything that comes beneath it, the electricity, the data, the drainage that we need, and another plan that I took from another development just to show how not different this is from a normal office space. And this is a speculative building. So what would I like to see in these buildings? We'd like to see an oversized utility system capacity. So you don't necessarily have to install them, but you have to make sure that you have the capacity to grow in the building so you can answer the questions of other people that are coming into these buildings. Electrical and data requirements are just growing. So with every year in, year out, we just need more. So make sure that you've got capacity there. Large trend rises we've gone through. Separate air exhaust systems. Yes, if you are actually putting solvents into the air, and we did say it might clash later with the issues of the quality of air in the city and regulations coming there. So might work on research. Consider the floor plate, floor plant, and vertical plant rooms. The floor on the side shows you how we put floor plant onto the floors to support companies that need a little bit more. Think about we can actually lease or charge for that space. Probably not as much as the floor plate itself, but still it's a specialist requirement. So have a look at that. Consider centralized services and metering them. And the reason is we'd like to be able to proportionally divide the usage of services in the building. So if you've got a light user, some data scientist on the building, it's easy. While another life science company might be using more, you can balance your leases through the service charges. Logistics will take more loading bays, gas storage, all the things that come with science. You don't have to install it. The fit out can install it, but you make sure that they have the space to do it. Remember the occupancy ratios, you're not racking and stacking them. There are lower occupancy ratios that may mean that you can play around with the lifts and actually dedicate lifts to just carrying on gases and things that we need. And this is a bigger SimCity approach to how we look at this and how the infrastructure should work, going back to Tez saying that we still need city and government sort of to help us out in the overall neighborhood infrastructure. But just to balance that, the picture on the left is of White City in London. So this is not a pipe dream. And to take us back full circle and saying we can look at everything, I've chosen the least usable building for science and tech or healthcare. This is the Shard, everybody knows it, the picture on the side. It's a vanity project, every city needs some. It's a beautiful building, it's a great building, it wasn't designed for anything special. But you can see the list of the tenants, and they're quite diverse. That's only in the office, not to mention that they've got hotels, residentials, restaurants and bars in the same place. What I'd like to concentrate on is HCA, which is a private healthcare provider that chose, despite the problems and the expense, to fit out in there. And their reasons are obvious. They're close to London Bridge, they're close to the city, they put in CTs, MMRs, everything. They've got a dedicated lift that they've charged for them. But although the hardship of fitting out in that building and the expensive rates, they figured out that with all the city people with private healthcare and the ability to pop over during your lunchtime to get your MMR scanned, it was worth it. Now, if we take this really iconic building that's got all its restrictions and think about how much more feasible it is to adapt an unremarkable deep floor plate 80s building that we've got plenty of. So what would I like you to take away from this as a thought process? Well, we talked about two types. We spoke about the predominantly science buildings. Flexibility and adaptability is one thing, the proximities, the affiliations. What's important to remember here is you're developing to the demand curve. So basically, don't look at the person that's saying that he needs space now. It's not relevant. Look at the last 5 years. How's the growth looking? In the science and tech market, it's looking quite good. And if we can see enough spin-outs coming out of the university and we can see that curve going up, then we can start building around them. There will be the people to take up the spaces. Construction takes time, so you're always designing for something, or you're always developing, if it's a major building, for the next 3, probably 5, looking at the 5 to 10 years forward. So that's why you're looking at the development curve. The other side of that is the multi-use. Still needs flexibility and adaptability. What we're now seeing in the market is people asking for lab-ready buildings. And that's and what does that mean? Probably, if you take a BCO building that we used to argue about before, are we doing full BCO? It's going to be BCO plus, probably an uplift about 10 to 20% on cost to adapt to what we want. All sectors, we're looking at all sectors, local demand, consider the tenant types and distribution in the building, and the shared amenities. Flexible letting models, we talked about that, charge them for usage or charge for extra spaces which don't normally charge for. You get longer leases with these people. And just remember, not all types of users are looking for the same thing. And that's me, quite quickly.
Great, thanks. Thank you so much, Elad. Just to sort of sum up what we have said today, there's some 5 key points. London is evolving, and it is, we know it, centers are shifting, they're competing, they're expanding, there's new spaces, new focal points, and we need to establish if those traditional centers that we have been having so far can evolve with London at the same time. But in order for them to evolve, we want them to evolve responsibly. So how do we do that? It's about that maintenance of London's fabric. It's about sustainable growth for that responsible development. We saw where everything stands sits in terms of London, but at this stage, it's how we can expand each one of those areas and what we can put in them. The changes that are upcoming are essentially 3 key ones. The potency of the real estate sector is changing. There are new emerging markets and industries that are coming into play. We're seeing some accelerated office trends as well. And from Elad's presentation, we did a science and tech sort of deep dive to see the disruptive trends that are actually revolutionizing the healthcare and science and technology, what the life sciences sector actually entails and what it actually needs, and what are the types of life sciences buildings that we could have. And delving a bit deeper into requirements of that science and technology, the company evolution process, the ecosystem that exists, and lastly, what the development requirements and changes of the buildings are. On that note, we'd like to thank you for your time. It was a pleasure, and opening up to any questions.
Thank you, Taze and Elad. Fantastic talk. Any questions from anyone? Do you want to stop your screen share so we can?
Absolutely.
Chris Turner, I think, has one.
Go for
it. Yes, thanks, chaps. Really interesting. I've just more of a thought, maybe something you can comment on. You mentioned 70 Gracechurch Street in your opening remarks, but many of us are familiar with the planning permission that the City of London granted to the Norman Foster building, the Tulip, that was subsequently refused and revoked by Sadiq Khan at the GLA. How do you think very localized, devolved decisions should be taken on that basis, where an authority can make a decision to grant permission to a building such as the Tulip, only for it to be revoked and refused at a higher level of local government.
Do you want me to take this?
Oh, yeah, sure. I'm always on mute.
Yeah. So, Chris, it depends on people's point of view, but we know historically, and if we look the last 20 years, almost every single building, tall building in the City of London had to go through appeal to get through. I think the walkie-talkie didn't, but it had to go through Secretary of State inquiry before it went through. So pretty much the same problem. I think we need to run these things locally. We can't have a sort of a focus group decide that this is too much, or to have somebody say this is beautiful or not beautiful. The walkie-talkie is an example in point. A lot of people don't like the building, but it leased out in record time because of its location and its floor plates. So you know, it shouldn't be too Sadiq to take things away. It should be done in a more organized manner. Martin, I hope that answers our opinion on it anyway.
I think what you're saying, Alad, is that there needs to be a more strategic overview first of what needs to happen before going into the local authority, into the devolved local authority level.
Effectively, it's done by unprofessional people, which is not really helping anybody.
Excellent. Martin, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thanks very much, Craig. Thanks very much, gentlemen. A fantastic presentation this evening. I really love the energy that you brought up, the fact that London's changing, London's evolving. What can it be? What are the possibilities? It's always a great way to get the mind going. I'm Martin Gettings. I'm Director of Sustainability at Canary Wharf Group. And whilst I've only been at the group for 10 years, I keep hearing the stories of the history of Canary Wharf, how it offered something new to London. It offered something that wasn't available. Rewinding back to 1987 and the dot-com boom, people were talking about this new thing called the internet. Everybody was going to have computers on the desks. What was that going to mean? Well, it meant a hell of a lot to buildings and to the infrastructure that was on offer in London. And effectively, that was the reason that Canary Wharf came to be, because the stock that was available, it was deemed unsuitable really for this dot-com boom that was going to happen. And it's really exciting now to hear you talking about this this life sciences. Much of the presentation that you gave this evening was around that sort of life sciences boom. You know, the fact that people are much more and more interested in health and well-being. Do you really think that the City of London and indeed places like Canary Wharf have enough to offer in terms of refurbishment? We don't want to see many more new builds. I guess we want to see these new developments embedded in existing infrastructure. And do you really think that my question is there enough infrastructure? That was what caused Canary Wharf's kind of inception, the fact that it was offering something different. With the stock that we've got in London right now, is there enough available for the next 30 years?
And Martin, in terms of properties, there are enough properties around London to refurbish, and I'm talking about the mid-range, nothing specialist things we can find, and Merck can build around King's Cross. Nobody else can afford to, but we can do our own buildings, and there's a lot of that 80 stock. Think about your Canary Wharf stock, 1986 buildings. They're way past their sort of first refurb stage. So we're talking about a lot of actually 80s buildings, deep floor plates, used to have quite a good floor to ceiling height. We need the infrastructure, and the infrastructure is killing us, because almost every big major development at the moment requires another substation. There is not enough electricity in London. We suffer from not enough drainage. and we need to look at our drainage systems. So infrastructure and our data is not great. Actually, the city is very good for it, but if we go outside, it's not necessarily that great. So we'll see things building around where the centers are. We have the hospitals, they're around the city. We have clinical trials around there, so the whole industry coming around that. Meditech spin outs coming out there. You got King's, you got Queen Mary, you got UCL, you got here East coming in, and a lot of engineering around there. That's another area. You got White City, sort of Imperial West, as it's known over there. So, and then you got King's Cross that took years to develop, but now has become a big thing. So, yes, we have the stock. We need to work on infrastructure, and we need a big push on infrastructure.
Yeah, transportation is also a big thing as well. On top of what Elad just said, if I just may add. So it's not just about electricity, the electrical supplies of substations, although we are seeing a huge issues with that, and some prominent projects having a bit of a shock when it comes to that. But transportation links are also quite important. What's taking the Canary Wharf as an example, if the number of people using the current infrastructure, the current tubes, falls as a result of changing of the work office relationship, then we can definitely accommodate an increase of people using it as a result of science and technology and healthcare. But had it been not that way, and adding that extra load onto an existing strain service, it would be very difficult. So the answer to your question is if the changes are going in the way that we think that they're going in terms of transportation, then yes, but there are other infrastructure constraints that we need to take into account for sure.
Right, the hour is upon us. I have to be somewhere else now. I've handed the hosting over to Paul Sim. So for those of you who want to stay on for the next 20 minutes, half hour, and carry on this interesting debate, that can you guys can do so. Thank you very much, everyone, for turning up. Without people turning up, this wouldn't happen. And watch out for the next one. We've got a major talk coming up in May from the Cabinet Office to tell us how things are, what the law is going to look like when everything gets back to normal, and how commercial and government contracts will be administered going forward over the next 5 years. Sounds incredibly boring, but I'm sure it'll be incredibly useful. Thank you, everyone, and good night.
Thanks, Craig. Appreciate it. Thank you.